Thank you very much. It's great to be here and to see some familiar faces. I'm going to present what ALIF is doing in terms of disaster risk management and emergency response. I'm sorry for those who know ALIF, it might be a bit long, but I'm also sorry for those who don't know ALIF, it might be a bit short, so I'll try to stay in between. So just a few words about who we are. We have been created after the destruction of cultural heritage in the Middle East and the Sahel region, because the financial needs were absolutely huge, and also because states realized that maybe a new international mechanism with flexibility and ability to act quickly was very much needed. And with the importance, where it's not the case for UNESCO, to have the ability to have public and private funding. So today, we are still very much accurate, unfortunately, and we also very much believe that cultural heritage, this is linked to Alessio's presentation as well, is a means of economic and social development, a means for sustainable development, a fight against climate change, and also reconciliation. So this is with this in mind that we are developing our projects. So ALIF is today the main global fund exclusively dedicated to the protection of cultural heritage in conflict and post-conflict areas, with a broad definition of conflict. We are a private foundation under the Swiss law based in Geneva, but we also have the status of the privileges and immunities of an international organization. We are a public and private partnership with 20 donors, from member states to private donors and foundation, but also the European Union, Monaco, Oman, Romania, and Switzerland, for instance. We are not just a financial instrument, we also are a scientific instrument with a startup mindset. So we finance and steer cultural projects. We work in conflict and post-conflict areas. We work before a conflict. We are at the disposal of institutions to have updates or create inventories when it's not the case, to digitize collection when it's needed, to update storage, to put security in museums, for instance. During a conflict, when it's possible, and we'll talk more in depth about what we do in Ukraine. And after a conflict, like we do, for instance, in Iraq with the rehabilitation of the Mosul Museum, where we worked with the Louvre Museum, with training the museum staff to be able to restore all the artifacts that have been damaged by Daesh, and the World Monument Fund for the building. We also, it has been mentioned yesterday, work with Hungary Helps in the Crac des Chevaliers with the University of Florence for the Aleppo Museum, for instance. We work in all the fields, the large picture of heritage of the field, and we have different possibilities. The annual calls for projects, sometimes it's completely open to all kinds of projects all over the world in conflict and post-conflict areas, or prevention. And sometimes these calls, like the previous one, are dedicated to one area or one field. It was the case last year with the call for Yemen. And we also have throughout the year the emergency relief measures and action plans. We'll talk about it. Here is the map of the project that we have to date. We have more than 430 projects in 35 countries. And be reassured, I won't go through all the projects, even if I would love to. In terms of disaster risk management, I picked a few examples of projects. This is a project in Côte d'Ivoire, in the Museum of Civilization. It's one of the largest museums of the country. They have a collection of 16,000 artifacts. It's not the 3.8 million of the museum, but it's still a good collection. And we provide them with some help to have armored doors, because it was not the case, windows, but also to improve the storage equipment with new shelves, locks on the door, and inventory. Still in Côte d'Ivoire, we had that project with ICOM, with the ICOM HQ, but the National Committee in Côte d'Ivoire, who identified 2 museums that were very much damaged because of lack of management. So here you can see that the roof that was very heavily damaged because of heavy rains, that has been rearranged, and also equipment to update their inventory, have a training on illicit trafficking, and in a second museum where we put armored doors and built a new storage space for the artifacts. Still with ICOM, this is a huge and interesting project for 20 museums in Mali, in Burkina Faso. The idea was to just the very preoccupying situation in Burkina Faso, where they're facing a lot of similarities with Mali in terms of risk, but also in terms of management of the collection, as they have very similar collection in terms of typography. So here they did training on illicit trafficking. They are either updating or drafting emergency plans for the 22 museums, but they are also exchanging now on a daily basis on best practices and similarity of risk that they are facing. So we also have action plans, as I said. We have an action plan, we had an action plan for Beirut right after the blast. That's where we also have a broad vision of conflict, as we know Lebanon not being at the moment of the blast within a conflict. We also had, so action plan is a way for us to act very quickly, as we just asked our board to approve an envelope, or in the case of Beirut or Ukraine, 5 million USD. And then within 24 hours, we just work on, evaluate a project that we have, or something that we think that it's very much needed, and it's approved within 24 hours, instead of having a full evaluation and the process of adopting a project. We also had an action plan for Syria and Turkey after the earthquake. That's in this framework that we are working in the Crac des Chevaliers, for instance. We also have an action plan for Libya and an action plan for Morocco after the earthquake, and an action plan for South Caucasus. So here just a few figures on Lebanon, where we had 20 projects. For the stabilization, emergency stabilization of 40 historical houses, for cultural or religious institutions, and also for the restoration of museums and their collections. And now I go more in deep, and it's linked to what Ihor and Vanessa presented a little bit, our action plan for Ukraine. Since day one, we coordinated with our partners and with the national and international organizations. We approved an action plan with an envelope of 5 million, and it has been reinforced with funding from the European Union, from the foreign policy instruments, the Getty Foundation, and also Monaco. And I'll just give a few examples of the area of action plan. We work for museums, library, and archives, for sites and monuments, and for the heritage professionals on the ground. In a few figures, so we have to date almost, because we had the approval last week, almost 200 projects. Half of them are completed, and we are supporting almost 400 organizations with 5.3 million committed to date. We have emergency funds dedicated to very reliable partners on the ground. They have envelope, and that allows them to work very quickly when something happens suddenly. It's the case in Odessa, where you can see here that within a few days they were able to put USB plates on the most iconic monuments that were damaged, and more recently for the fine art museums. You might have followed the news. For museum, library, and archives, we provide them with storage equipment, fire safety equipment, materials to secure doors and windows, and as Vanessa said, we were very lucky at the beginning to be recognized as humanitarian help. That helped a lot to be super efficient and to organize the solidarity, because a lot of museums and institutions were willing to give and to do a lot for Ukraine, but didn't know how to get organized. So we kind of organized and coordinated a bit this help, modestly, because I know that a lot of organizations did that as well. And we financed and coordinated the transport of wooden crates and equipment from a lot of countries in Europe, and also Switzerland, in the UK. We provide the institution with generators. That has been mentioned yesterday. It's very important and crucial. We are doing the same right now for the winter that is coming. We also updated 9 very big artifact storage facilities. So a lot of collections have been evacuated from the museum within the country, but the lack of space or the poor condition of these storage spaces would have put the artifacts in danger as well. So we worked a lot to update the storage facilities within the country, mostly in the West. We also work with the National Research and Restoration Center of Ukraine. They have 4 branches, one in Kyiv, in Lviv, in Kharkiv, and in Odessa. And we provide them with a little van that you can see here, and that works like ambulances. This is full of equipment and restorer, and they either go on site to provide some equipment or emergency restoration. When it's too heavily damaged, they take the artifacts with them in their center and restore and keep in safe places the artifacts from museums and from churches, for instance. For sites and monuments, we do 3D documentation and photogrammetry for documentation and for potential further conservation and restoration or rehabilitation if it's damaged. We also have a monitoring system with UCLA, and we have projects of stabilization. So at the beginning, we were very much focused on institutions that were directly damaged because of the war, but then we realized that a lot of institutions were suffering from a lack of management, being completely abandoned for almost 2 years now. So we also have projects of stabilization of, for instance, wooden church that would have probably collapsed without emergency help. And I will end with this because that seems very important for us, and this is the case with all our projects. We support very much heritage professionals all over Ukraine. You may know that some of them are not paid anymore, or their salary have been heavily reduced because of war effort. These people like Ihor are risking their own life to protect their heritage. So through specific funding, like the one with European Astra and Global Heritage Fund, it's specifically dedicated to the support of heritage professionals, but we are also always supporting them financially through the 400 projects that we have all over Ukraine. And this is something that we do for all our projects. I thank you very much, and I'm here if you have any questions.